Dr. Mathur is the Director General of TERI and a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change. He was Director General of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in the Government of India for about 10 years and was responsible for bringing energy efficiency into our homes, offices and factories through initiatives like the Star Labeling Program, which I think is a wonderful initiative, the Energy Conservation Building Code and Perform, Achieve and Train Program for energy intensive industries. Dr. Mathur earlier worked with TERI and then headed the climate change team of World Bank in Washington, DC. He was also president of Suzlon Energy and headed the interim secretariat of the Green Climate Fund. He's been a key negotiator representing India in climate change negotiations and was the Indian spokesperson at the 2015 Paris negotiations. He's also a global leader on technological approaches to address climate change and has recently joined the global group of industrial, financial and think tank leaders to co-chair an Energy Transitions Commission, which will suggest ways for companies and countries to move towards climate-friendly energy futures. So may I request Dr. Mathur to please share his views on the future of sustainability.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have been looking forward to this ever since you first invited me, for many reasons. But this was very, very unusual events. But I think I can speak loud enough. Yeah. So, one of the things that I have really appreciated about Mahindra Group is how you look at sustainability as being the driver for future business growth. The electric vehicles is just one area, but I look at how you develop the EPC work for solar. I look at, I came to know just now of the work that you are doing on creating businesses for micro irrigation and for providing agricultural services, soil quality and so on. The kinds of businesses that you have created, in a sense, have sustainability built into that. So you want me to wait till the...
No, if you want to come forward,
okay.
That's fine.
Oh, okay.
Just be careful.
Right, there's a step here. Yeah. Okay. So, consequently, there has been created in this organization a much greater commitment, much greater dovetailing of business processes with sustainability than I see anywhere else. Not only in India, but in a sense globally. I look forward to this interaction, and when I was asked to share my thoughts on the future of sustainability, I was a little bit challenged because I thought, whatever I have to say, you guys have already done it. So what do I say? But nevertheless, I thought it would be good to spark a discussion, and I look forward to the discussion that would happen after I stop talking. Now, what I want to do is to focus on four things. The first is, in a sense, how do we, and by we I mean the Indian corporate sector, how do we look at sustainability? The second is to focus on what I believe is one of the key sustainability challenges that faces us today, which is that of climate change. And third, link it with the kind of global and national actions that are being taken to address it. And in the last part, I want to look at the risks that the climate change discussion is bringing into the business world, and the flip side of it, what are the opportunities that what I'd like to start with is that if I look at, for example, the kind of business models that ITC Bhadrachalam has done, in which they provide saplings to farmers and then commit to buying the wood that is produced by the trees that grow, is one way of looking at sustainability. You're making sure that you get the raw material that you need over the lifetime of the plant. And you're also making sure that there is a degree of linkage between the people who live around the plant and the plant itself. There is a common economic bonding that has occurred due to this business model. So what you're doing is ensuring the longer term sustainability of the plant, where raw material availability becomes the key constraint. A completely different approach, this time on the consumer side, was done by JSW when they made their steel plant. They looked at creating a market share for themselves in the high performance steels section, and worked very closely with manufacturers of motors and transformers to create high efficiency motors and transformers, for which, in a sense, the market did not exist. Helped them with the designs, even to some extent with the marketing. And I know this because they were in the motors and transformers committee of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. They were regular members who were pushing that it was possible to manufacture and sell more efficient products. So, creating a new market position and then sustaining it was their view of what was important for sustainability. While we were driving here from the airport, I was mentioning to Ivan when he was talking about the need to provide electricity to villages around your sites. Few years ago, we convinced NTPC to provide electricity to villages which are within a 5-kilometer radius. And again, the issue there being that there was so much antagonism between the farmers whose land had been procured for creating those plants and the degree of social acceptability. We are good neighbors kind of view that they do. The short point I'd like to leave you with is sustainability means different things to different people depending on what they see as the greatest threat to the existence of their business. And in this, I have a view which is that sustainability is not CSR. Sustainability is your main business practices. How do we make sure that they align themselves with our goals that the business should go on and the national goals of being able to provide the services that people want and are willing to.
The one issue which I believe is creating the greatest degree of uncertainty as far as the future is concerned, and therefore has become an issue which companies, manufacturing companies, financing companies, and ultimately consumers are grappling with, and that's the issue of climate change. There is now a huge traction across the world and increasingly in India amongst people who want to make sure that the choices that they are making are climate friendly. We know that there is a difference between how people think and how people act. But at least as far as thinking is concerned, this is the issue of being climate friendly is something that is increasingly becoming a part of the rhetoric that is happening. This is unprecedented. The closest that I can think of is the kind of global public opinion that occurred when a lot of manufacturing companies, a lot of investment companies were forced to take their investments out of the white South Africa, and, in the apartheid days. But that was about moving investments. Now we are even talking of technologies of tomorrow, which will be very different from the technologies of today, particularly as far as their carbon emissions are concerned. This, therefore, has the potential to completely disrupt the kind of industrial ecosystem, the industrial infrastructure that we have, with new companies which have a lower carbon footprint and can offer a lower carbon footprint to take over the market. So, where is it that we go with these kinds of changes that are happening? So, I only want you to look at the newspapers of the last few weeks and see the kind of rhetoric against, for example, the coal mine that the Adani Group has in Australia. There's a very strong move that this mine should not start producing coal. All the major banks in Australia have come out in public saying that they will not support this investment. Now, it's quite possible that as far as this mine is concerned, it may find investment somewhere else. China is where I'm told they're looking for now. But the issue remains that a large part of the normal investment market is now getting out of something that it would have easily supported 10 years ago. What this means is that the kinds of investments that we think of for tomorrow have to take into account what is the kind of impact it has on climate change. If you look at the global level, the Paris Agreement was a very good example of how the countries of the world came together to create a global regime and, more importantly, national narratives on how they would deal with climate change. One, everybody agreed that we needed to make sure that the global temperature did not increase to more than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial average. Second, and this was a true innovation, we all agreed that every country in the world would work towards addressing climate change and reducing our emissions. But each country would do it in the manner that it suited them best. So every country put its own commitments, its own pledges on the table. There was no top-down approach to say this is what you should do. We had done this earlier in the climate change thing when the Kyoto Protocol, the developed countries had specific targets. But what we found was that as countries found that they could not meet their targets, they moved out of it. So that didn't help. What the thinking at Paris was that if countries are pledging something and putting it on the table, the chances that they will deliver on it are far more, because I have promised it. Nobody has forced me. For us in India, it provided a huge opportunity, because this allowed us to align our national development goals with the global climate goals. So when we say that we will reduce our carbon intensity, which is the amount of carbon dioxide per unit of GDP, what we are saying is we are not going in yet for absolute emissions, because a lot of people in India still do not have access to adequate energy. We will need to increase it, but what we promise is that we will do it with greater and greater and greater efficiency. Second, we said that at least 40% of the generation that occurs in 2030 would come from non-fossil sources, which is a huge pledge that this is the kind of, this is where we will go. And the third was that I think 2.5 billion tons of
sequestration of carbon dioxide through trees?
There is already an evolving movement amongst countries of the world that the CO2 emissions will keep on decreasing over time. We have a goal of 42. We have come from 65 to 59 to 53. We still have a gap of 11, and I think we can take it for granted that between now and say 2025, the pledges that countries make would be more ambitious and would get us to the 42 gigaton. So let me now come back to what is it that India is doing. As I said, we have tended to work to see where alignment of national development goals and development goals happens. Where has this happened? It has happened in the areas of energy access. This country has believed for a very long time, I think it was in the 1970s when the then Department of Non-Conventional Energy Sources was created, with the express goal of ensuring that renewables provides the energy that is needed in the large rural population of this country. We are pushing energy efficiency, which helps competitiveness. We are pushing afforestation, which is both about providing livelihoods, water conservation, as well as protecting biodiversity. So all of these are very central national development goals. We are doing it, for example, through the energy efficiency, through the labeling program, through the perform, achieve and trade program for industry. I am now out of the government for an adequate amount of time, but I've seen that after I left the government, the second and the third cycles of the Perform, Achieve and Trade program for industry have been introduced. They have brought in stricter targets and they have increased the number of sectors that they cover. My own assumption is that the energy intensity decline or the specific energy consumption decline in these sectors between 2015 and 2030 would be at a minimum of 30%. This is a challenge. I mean, look at the steel industry. Yes, there are huge inefficiencies, but there's also a large amount of new capacity that is coming in. Similarly with cement. But one of the things that we have seen is that as a result of the first cycle of the Perform, Achieve and Trade system, the Indian cement industry today is the most energy efficient cement industry anywhere in the world. In other words, our growth has become an opportunity for us. So the new plants that are put up reflect new technologies, reflect new operating practices, and often use raw materials that are byproducts elsewhere. So the new cement plants, for example, that are coming up on the Tamil Nadu-Karnataka border are built that they will use a lot of waste materials as instead of virgin fuels in the kilns. Similarly, we have pushed institutional measures to enable the large-scale adoption of LED lights. There's a new program that has been launched in a similar manner for super efficient air conditioners, and most recently for electric cars. On the renewable side, again, the large-scale procurement again and again and again has led to a decline in the renewables prices. There is a question whether the solar prices that have been offered are sustainable or not, but I would like to suggest that while individual companies may fail, the sector as a whole and the direction of travel will not change. So it is quite possible that we will be, the lowest price that we got on the solar auctions is ₹2.44 for a kilowatt hour of electricity from solar. it is quite possible that this may not move for a year, year and a half. But then we will start seeing the decline again. And TERI believes that in about 10 years, say around 2025, 2026 or so, we will be at a stage where the price of solar plus the price of batteries, in other words, you can use solar electricity as and when you want it, would be less than the price of electricity from coal from a plant made at that time. All of this tells us that there is both a vibrancy in the market that allows these kinds of interventions to occur, as well as a push towards the kinds of interventions that address climate change. So let me now move to what are the kinds of risks and the kinds of opportunities that we face. I would suggest that there are three kinds of risks that we need to look at. The first is, let me call this the risk of stranded assets. If we set up a production plant today, which uses a lot of energy and puts out a lot of fossil energy and puts out a lot of CO2 to say make a ton of steel or cement, both from a regulatory point of view, bad system, as well as increasingly from a global demand point of view, would find it extremely difficult to survive. New plants which are set up using high energy or high CO2 may find it increasingly difficult to get investments. So difficulty in getting investments, you can look at it as a separate risk or put it together with the risk for stranded assets. So it's either one or two risks there. Similar is the risk with products. Products that use a lot of energy, produce a lot of CO2, will, both for competitive reasons, the price of energy, as well as for carbon dioxide reason, find a declining market. We are seeing that in some markets, parts of the US, Europe, people are asking a declaration of what is the amount of CO2 that either went into the manufacturing or the amount of CO2 that will be used in the while the product is being used. And the product being used could be air conditioner or could be a car. So range of products. So that's the first area of risks that I see. You have, in a sense, incorporated that risk into your business decision making with the carbon pricing that has been introduced. You were the first company in India to introduce that concept. I think that's a very strong step in ensuring that that is a risk that is covered. The third risk, so the first was stranded assets, second was finding investment for new assets. The third risk is that of the adverse impact of climate change on your assets. So for example, if you have a plant on the coast and we expect more cyclones, it would obviously mean that that plant is damaged, but more importantly, as in this city we know, flooding leads to non-productive days. Look at your own record. The number of non-productive days 10 years ago and the number of non-productive days now. I would, a colleague of mine who did these numbers said that 10 years ago when they took a 5-year average, the number of non-working days because of high monsoon was typically 1 or 2. There was never more than 2. Here, now, if you look at the last 2 years, we are already seeing 3-4 days. And that's just 10 years. Similarly, you do a lot of work in the farm area. We are looking at a future in which the in which the hydrological cycles are changing. What does that mean? Fundamentally, the number of days that it rains has decreased. There has been a very little decline in the total amount of rainfall, but the number of days of rain has decreased. So you have few days with high rain and then a lot of days with no rain. Reservoir capacity in this country cannot be increased. We are a very highly, densely populated country. What does that mean? It means that the water comes, you can use, you can store what you have, and the rest of it goes away. This has huge impacts on the yields related to the seeds. It has a huge impact on when do we apply fertilizer. Again, whether it is the productive systems of agriculture, whether it is the productive systems in urban areas, whether it is assets, all of them could be at risk because of the adverse impacts of climate change. So these are the three major risks that I see. So let me end by focusing on the kinds of opportunities that exist, particularly for an organization like Mahindra, which is focusing on a large number of areas. As I said when I started, one of the great pleasures in working with you is the fact that you have sustainability built into your DNA. I always admire and take every opportunity to point out that you got into the electric vehicle business. I'm sure that you must have had a lot to do with it growing up. When this was not even on the radar, I'm very sure that you must have heard it innumerable times. Why on earth are we spending money on this? The answer is here now. For a variety of reasons, and I want to focus on these because they tell us how policy thinking changes. For a variety of reasons, we are pushing electric vehicles. Why? Yes, of course, there is the longer-term climate issue. But I think what is important to look at is the here and nows which are influencing policy change. What are those here and now? One, in spite of the fact that international petroleum prices have been weak, the total amount of money that we spend for importing petroleum has been increasing and increasing dramatically. Linked, of course, to the fact that a larger number of people are now using mobility, mechanical mobility than they did earlier. There is a very strong move to see how we can manage the money that is spent on it. The second problem that has occurred is that for a variety of reasons, we have ended up investing a huge amount of money in building electricity generation capacity. We have a total electricity generation capacity of about 320 gigawatts, of which about 210 gigawatts is coal-based capacity. And the maximum amount of electricity that we have been able to sell is 162 gigawatts. So many people have invested in power plants, put them online, but are unable to sell electricity. But they still have to pay their loans. They can't sell electricity, how do they repay their loans? Banks don't get their money back. When banks don't get their money back, they don't have the money to lend for other things. Growth is suffering. So that's the second macroeconomic problem. And that macroeconomic problem is leading to the conclusion that if we can use electricity in a new sector, that will be great. So you have got these two macroeconomic trends, one to decrease the petroleum import exposure and the other to increase electricity sale. Where do they come together? They come together to promote electricity. In the background is the understanding that in the long term, as our electricity system becomes more and more renewable, and as our mobility systems become more and more electric, we can move to a future in which at least urban transportation moves to low and zero Other areas which I believe are important include that of something which is very related, something that you're already working on is solar. You are providing EPC services, and I see Anita there, rooftop solar as part of your offerings, particularly for the commercial sector to begin with, because in every state in the country, the commercial tariff today exceeds the price at which you can provide solar electricity. For example, in the India Habitat Center where we have our offices, we put up solar 2 years ago. A third party put it in and we buy electricity from him at 5 rupees 50 paisa. We buy electricity from the electricity company at 720. Today, you should be able to do it at something in the vicinity of 4, probably 350, somewhere in between. What I would urge is to see if you can provide this as a service. The reason is that as we are looking at all the technology options, which are more climate friendly, they also tend to be higher capital cost than the current solutions. Which means that I as a user have got more money going out of my pocket in the beginning, and often I tend to make a decision that I will go for a cheaper, what is a cheaper capital cost? How do we help? As I mentioned about the solar system on top of the India Habitat Center, there is somebody who has put it there and provides electricity as a service. I think being able to provide these as a service is one way of making sure that the market share grows. Similarly, in the case of batteries, very clearly, as we move towards either renewable energy systems in the power side or on electric cars, batteries become important. Again, this is an opportunity. Batteries even today has got a particular business model. You use it, you have it charged, you take it back. How will it work in the future? What is the kind of business model? And more importantly, how do you ensure that there is a constant improvement in the batteries that are available? It's another business opportunity that is there. Linked to it, we're right now talking of electric storage, is thermal storage. The vast amount of, the times when we have the peak in electricity demand is when all of us are using air conditioners. Is it possible to lower the peak by having thermal storage, from which we draw the cool at the time when the peak occurs? I suggest, whether it is for air conditioning or whether it is for industry, I can capture solar heat during the day, but if I have a process industry which runs at night, what do I do? Thermal energy storage becomes as important a technological solution as is electrical storage. And the last thing that I'd like to focus on is on your let me call it the life sciences business, the agri-businesses that's important. As I mentioned, there is already a problem of the suitability of seeds with the soil, with the water availability. And the way today it is being answered is by putting in more and more chemical fertilizers. Can we look at alternatives? Your micro-irrigation business is a great idea. Yet, the penetration of micro-irrigation has been relatively small. Largely because, again, the first cost is high. And unfortunately, in the case of water, the running cost, the cost of water to a farmer is actually zero. How do we make a transition? On the quality of seeds, what are seeds that can be there in low water situations, in drought situations? Do we need to look at different varieties? Do we need to look at seeds of the same varieties that are more drought resistant? Again, I believe that there is an opportunity that exists there. In short, every risk also brings with it huge opportunities. And for us in India, particularly, looking at a global market, but India being a large market by itself allows us the opportunity to use this market to grow, bring prices down by growth, and therefore go into the global market. One of the things that we have seen is that when change happens, it happens very fast. Problem is, when does it start? I believe that the change to renewable energy in this country has already started. We are looking at a 10 to 15-year time frame in which renewables becomes the default option. I would be willing to stick my head out and say that we will not see any more, even today, we will not see any more decisions regarding investments in coal power plants even in this country. Change, therefore, I believe, provides a huge opportunity for sustainability, particularly for this organization. Let me thank you, and I look forward to a discussion which I'm sure will be extremely stimulating. Many, many thanks.
Apologies, Dr. Mathur, for the inconvenience. We had an unwelcome, uninvited visitor, Mr. Murphy, and his law kind of overlooked all the laws we'd set for ourselves. So question answer time now. I must tell you that people who joined on the webcast, despite whatever experience they may have had sent in questions beforehand. So you're going to compete for time with them. So first question from Ulas.
Thank you for the excellent speech. My question is, you were talking about electric cars and how they create carbon-free transportation in cities. Now, typically what happens is you have some impact from carbon dioxide and some impact from pollutants. And would there be opportunities to go to particularly more polluted places like the big metro cities and create, carbon-free transportation? And is there a trade-off between the one and the other? At what point does it become worth somebody's while to allow the CO2 to get generated in a different place, but save the pollution in a particular area?
Very quick answer. I've spoken of the two large macroeconomic drivers, but there is the third driver of air pollution. This morning, the air quality in Delhi was already at 532 micrograms per cubic meter of 2.5 micron particles. The safe level is 60. We were in amazingly polluted space. The political system is at this moment of time forced to react. Now, again, for a very different reason, this 532, the vast amount of it is actually coming from the burning of biomass in Punjab. The total emissions due to vehicles is probably somewhere around 60 micrograms a day of that 532. Nevertheless, as you rightly said, a lot of the other pollutants are coming from there. So I believe that today an opportunity exists. The window is there to look at electric cars as a solution to the spikes in air quality that occurs. It's not going to solve everything, but I think it's a great opportunity.
Yes, Vivek, your hand went up first.
So, Dr. Mathur, you explained this excellent example of India Habitat Center, where cost of electricity from the provider is 7 rupees, but through solar it can come from 3.5 to 4 rupees. So, one language which everyone understands is the language of money.
Correct.
So, what's the catch? Why is this not exponentially increasing?
Okay, so this is something that we very, very closely work with. So there are three reasons. The first and foremost is how do I, if I have a rooftop, how do I ensure that I team up with the right partner? There are many players in the market. There are something like 3,000 people who provide these services. And my fear is I get linked to a third-rate player. The quality of things he puts in is useless. Yes, he suffers. He doesn't get money for the electricity. But then I also suffer. I've got something stuck up there. So the first issue is is in a sense a system that can tell who are people who are more trustworthy than others. The second issue relates to financing. Now, if a bank has to finance each individual project, it becomes very time consuming. So we need to find out risk mitigation methods for banks that they can provide funding to these aggregators for several buildings. Now, in the case of IHC, they actually look at our, the 23 buildings in the 23 organizations in the India Habitat Center. They look at our capabilities, whether we will be able to pay for the electricity in the agreement between him and us. This is amazingly time consuming. Transaction costs are huge. So that's the second part, and we are working with banks and with the RBI to see how this can be made. The third part is, let me say, structural issues. There are always fears that tomorrow another building may come up nearby which is taller and hide the sun availability on this roof. But that is a function of zoning. So in areas where zoning is applied with a greater degree of rigor are those cities where you see a greater penetration.
There are two more elements to this, and you had pointed that out in your speech. One is storage. So right now, this 5 rupees is when the sun shines, and not when you need the thing. If you add storage, right now it's very expensive. So when the storage becomes inexpensive, it becomes part of the 5 rupees per kilowatt hour, then you will see a spike up. And third is the energy density. So right now you can get only so much from the rooftop. You cannot meet all your requirements of the household, especially for tall buildings. And for setting up large plants, you need hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, which can only happen in remote areas, which therefore requires the transmission and feeding. So this is the other one, the intensity that I don't know if Vasant is here, but intensity is a big issue right now, and that needs to.
Both of those are absolutely.
Let me go to a question that came in from our colleagues elsewhere in the country, which is sort of related. The question goes like this: are companies going to be viable if they have to supply renewable power at the low prices that are being discovered in the reverse auction process being run by the government? How will the government stop the new practice of reneging on or renegotiating renewable energy contracts already made?
So, as far as the first issue is concerned, I think I had a very instructive discussion with Manoj Upadhyay, who heads the company which got the 244 award. Now, he said that he made this bid on the basis of a solar price of 20 rupees, 30 cents per watt of solar power. He says already the global price has gone up to 35. GST has been an additional imposition. So he said, my electricity will cost something like 2 rupees 52, 2 rupees 55, something like that. Will I supply it? Yes, I will. And I said, why? He said, dekhiye, I have a budget of something like 5 crores for outreach. If I am able to supply at 244, everybody knows me. It is worth that marketing expense. So, I have no idea whether this is a generic thing or whether it is specific to him. He has internalized in his mind that he will shift some of that marketing budget into meeting his costs. He also says that GST ke liye to main jhagda karunga. I'm going to make sure that I'm paid extra for the GST because when I bid, this thing wasn't in place. On the second issue, which is that of the reneging on contracts. This is very dangerous. And the Ministry of Power has written to each electricity company that you will not renege on it. If you renege on it, the government of India will fight against you in the courts. As a result, now this has gone to zero. In a situation where prices are falling, technology evolution is occurring, it's bound to happen that today's price will be lower than yesterday's price. Now, the via media that has been found is that if the contract has been written and signed, if the person has ordered equipment, then you will not touch the contract. On the other hand, if the contract has not yet been signed and the orders have not yet been put out, then there is a chance of going in for some renegotiation so that the person can take advantage of lower prices and therefore the consumer gets some advantage.
Chandra, you had a question.
Dr. Mathur, the point about smog in Delhi, it comes back to the same question about agri practices and also the cost of investment, like the alternative costs so much to, take out the grass or the stumps and then bale them. So the point is about how much should we have planned earlier and how are we going to plan this in future also, because this is about agri practices, this is about the vast majority of them are poor, MSP, many other things bundled into it. How do you plan this?
It's interesting, we were having a conversation on this before we came here. This burning did not occur 6 or 7 years ago, but there are two things that have led to this. The first is that earlier on, the practice was that the paddy was cut about 3 to 6 inches by hand. So all of it was cut. And then the fields were plowed and wheat was sown. The first thing that happened was that the labor that used to come into Punjab from Bihar has dramatically declined, particularly with Manrega coming into force. The second thing that has happened is that the cost of threshers and combines has come down. Now when threshers and combines cut, they cut the top 6 inches. So a large amount is left there. Now if you expect the farmer to now put in more money and get that cut again, that's not what we do. He finds it much cheaper to burn and then sow again. The only reason he will be willing to spend money on cutting is if he makes some money out of it. So in my view, the only way this can work is if we monetize it. That means create a business model. And what we are proposing, and my colleagues are actively talking both to farmers, to entrepreneurs and to government in Punjab, is that we create entrepreneurs who buy this, so they pay for it. If they pay for it, what do they do with it? So what we are doing is we are saying we will provide you with biomass pelleting machines. So you convert it into fuel as pellets or as briquettes. Okay, where is the market for it? Because if you carry it far, it costs a lot of money. So we are now talking to all the dhabas on the Punjab roads to see if they would use this instead of coal. Believe you me, it's not easy. But the central point that I believe that I agree with you is that unless we are able to monetize this, the burning will not stop.
May I add something more to this? So this is another big opportunity for us, and we are investigating right now, exactly taking from where Dr. Mathur have talked, that if we take this last 5 or 6 inch, and if we can go to the farmer and say, look, I'll even take it away for free, because otherwise he's burning. I'll take it away for free, and then convert that to bio-CNG that we are working on the plants that we have in Bangalore now, and then sell the fuel. So basically we are taking one step beyond and saying, I pick it up, I use the plants that we are creating to convert that to CNG, and then sell CNG to either vehicles or to restaurants as fuel for their kitchen. Absolutely. So that's a business model right now. In fact, I discussed it that day when you were at the C2 communication with the team in Agri and the team in Powerall, working with the team in Swaras. to see how we can put it all together and create a very viable business that solves two problems, solves the problem of burning and therefore smog in Delhi, and creates a business model. So another opportunity amongst the list of opportunities that you've given sustainability. And this is something that we have been working on very seriously and very good.
Terrific. So a question from here or a question from the list? Umesh.
You mentioned about the PAT scheme, and it is quite some time we are working on PAT scheme for around 8-9 industries only. Right. And as you mentioned, because of this PAT scheme, cement industry becomes the world best in energy efficiency. When we are likely to deploy to other industries?
So it has been enhanced from 8 to 11. So the railways, the bus companies and the electricity distribution companies have also been brought in the ambit of PAT 2. PAT 3 has been introduced to cover new plants in these 11 sectors. PAT 4, which will come out by March 31st of 2018, will cover new sectors, particularly the ones that are being considered are petrochemicals, there are 3 that are being considered, I forget, remember and tell you. But the key in coverage is they should account for a substantial amount of energy used in the country, number 1. There should be a potential for energy efficiency enhancement. And 3, there must be a manageable number of organizations which are covered. So, for example, yes, one of the things that is being thought of is commercial buildings. And again, if we include commercial buildings, it could be tens of thousands. So I think they're starting with 5-star hotels.
Okay. Yes, Vijay.
Not able to understand what is this PAT scheme?
Okay. The PAT scheme covers a certain number of the specified units in a particular sector. So say the cement sector is covered. So cement plant 1, cement plant 2, cement plant 3, cement plant 4 are covered. And typically they are covered up to some minimum size. That's number 1. Number 2, each one of them is given a target of how much reduction in specific energy consumption they have to achieve over a 3-year period. So today you are using 100 kilocalories per ton of product. 3 years later you must use 94 or 95 or 96. One of the features of the PAT scheme is that everybody does it at the same time, either in absolute terms or in percentage terms. Those who are already efficient have a smaller target. Those who are inefficient have a larger target.
Will you give something?
Yes. It's these are under the Energy Conservation Act, and the targets are notified. The first cycle covered 478 units, and the goal was that they would result in a saving of about 6.6 million tons of oil equivalent worth of energy every year. What they actually achieved was about 8.8. And if they achieve more, they get certificates, which they can either keep for the next cycle or sell to others who want to use them for compliance.
Can I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Last year we saw, and I think that this is still an issue, while central government is pushing for renewable in a big way, but many state governments, and we faced in Maharashtra last year, that when we went for wind power, it took us almost 7 to 8 months waiting and requesting them to allow us to use that. So is something happening in a big way, because otherwise it doesn't really work.
So there are you see, Maharashtra was one of the early starters in the wind energy business. So the wind farms at Satpura and so on are examples of that investment. But what has happened in some states is that the state electricity companies are finding it expensive to pay the companies on time. So they have been, let me say, shy in entering into new agreements because it would mean that their outstandings would increase even more. So even though there are targets, the kinds of problems that face the state distribution companies are leading to a slowdown. On the other hand, if you just go to Madhya Pradesh or even Rajasthan, you find that they are much faster in processing these applications. Karnataka used to be slow, but Karnataka has picked up again.
Let me go to a couple of electric car questions, Dr. Mathur. One is a question I've often heard, that electric cars running on power generated in thermal power stations are not really green. Even by 2030, most of our power will be from coal. Why are we pushing the change to electric cars then?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. The vast amount of our electricity is produced from coal today. There will be a lesser amount that will be produced from coal in 2030, but it would still be a large amount. But if I go out further, if I go to 2050, there will be a very small percentage of electricity produced from coal. If I go to 2060, that number might be zero. Now, creating infrastructure for a new market like electric cars takes time. If we don't get into this today, there is no way we will be ready for 2020 or 2030 or 2040. Yes, in the interim, the cars would have high CO2 emissions, but in the long term, we can move to a future with zero carbon emissions from this sector.
So you've actually set up the next question.
I need to
Please.
answer this. Dr. Mathur, I think TERI should perhaps put an end to this debate by providing authentic data. Okay. The data that I have tells me that if we were to look at average CO2 emitted per unit of energy produced in India today, and not just take the worst of coal power, then electric vehicles will be below CNG, just about the level of CNG, and lower than petrol and diesel in CO2. That's the data that I have coming from Government of India websites. Okay? And I'll discuss with you later when we're done with this. And if I look at the projections that are given by government in terms of what will CO2 emitted per unit of energy produced by 2026, it will be 30% lower than today. Absolutely. Right? So therefore, by 2026, electric vehicles will be about 35-40% lower CO2 emitted than it is today. And right now it is at par. Though many people believe that it is higher today. So that's the where if TERI could kind of publish.
One of the things that we face is that the goalposts keep changing. Till now, the discussion was in operation. How much do electric vehicles use and how much do internal combustion engine vehicles use? In the past few weeks, the debate has changed into the cradle to grave emissions. And now the discussions that are coming out is that the amount of energy that is used in making batteries is so much that it takes it up. May well be true, but again the point is this is an evolution that is happening. And I think it's the evolution that we need to focus on, as you very rightly said.
Yeah, the battery part also we need to look at, because if you're making battery, you're not making energy.
Exactly. Absolutely. All the foundry that energy is also.
I can see that as a project from us to TERI very soon. Okay. So you set up the next question very nicely, Dr. Mathur. For India to have 100% electric cars by 2030, let's assume it will happen, what infrastructure do we have to put in place? What are the various kinds of infrastructure? Chargers we keep hearing about. When do you expect them to be ready? What will we do with the current stock of vehicles? And what will happen to the petrol pumps? I don't have the name. I think he just got saved.
I wish I could answer all of these completely, because much of this is thinking as we go ahead. As we speak, the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission and the Forum of Regulators are looking at regulations for charging. Because of lacuna that exists in the Electricity Act, and in the regulations, right now there is a interpretation that if there is a person who has a charging station, he is quote unquote reselling electricity, and reselling electricity is not allowed under the regulations. To me, it is a semantic problem, but to the regulators, it's a big problem because it means a tariff. Do they control the tariff or not, or allow the person to charge whatever the market can bear? Key point is people are thinking about it. The second is that a number of business models are being tried on how charging stations work. Because of the large number of electric rickshaws that have already come in, what the Tata Power Distribution Company in Delhi started doing, in North Delhi, they started having poles. And they would supply electricity at high tension rates to that pole. And the person who managed that pole could get electric rickshaws there, plug them in and charge them whatever the market would bear. Now this actually stopped when this entire discussion of whether he's a reseller of electricity or not started. But the fact that I want to leave you with is that there are already business models that are in the process of being used. There's a third business model, or second business model, which has been put out. It's a little difficult in terms of logistics, little is probably an understatement, which is called the swapping of batteries. So I could see it, for example, in the case of a two-wheeler. You take a two-wheeler to a petrol pump, the old battery is taken out, and a new battery, charged battery is put in. And then all of these batteries that need charging are sent to a central place where they are charged. My feeling is we will need all of these. I mean, if you think of it for a car, taking a battery out and replacing it, and particularly when you have an electric car with a large battery capacity, it's going to be heavy. So you will need robotics or whatever to change. So it's not going to be that simple. However, it is my belief that the charging infrastructure would lead the market. And I base this on, and again, Dr. Goenka, you may know this story far better than I do. Somewhere in around 1910, the number of electric cars and ICE cars in the US were about the same. But then, Mr. Rockefeller put petrol pumps along the highways. And there were no electric lines across the country. So if I was using a car to go from, say, in New York to Buffalo, I would find enough petrol pumps, but I wouldn't find enough recharging stations. And that, in my view, completely changed the dynamics of the industry. So the investment in infrastructure will change. In my view, the petrol pumps would start providing charging services as well. Now, each one of us can also charge in our homes. Some of us live in places where charging is possible, others live in places where it is more difficult. So there will be a range of charging options that will have to come into the market.
So is there anybody with a question which they feel they just have to ask? Okay, Kiran, that's the last question for today.
Dr. Mathur, I want to talk about the topic of waste. Like we talked about paddy and everything else. And in between, I had read that on the Indian roads, 50 to 20 years old vehicle will not be there. And there is a whole issue on vehicle disposal. I just wanted to throw some light on how the future will be in this area.
Kiran, it's almost as if this was a planted question. Because sitting right across from you is my colleague, Dr. Shilpi Kapoor. Shilpi has just completed a piece of work on the recycling of automobile, let me not call it waste, but at the end of life, what do you do with all the components in an automobile? She will be able to answer this question far, far better than I ever had.
And Sumit isn't here today. He would have been most excited to hear about this study because I understand he's setting up a business in that area.
So I'll discuss with you details maybe later, but the whole idea is we've come up with a stakeholder responsibility and mapping where every stakeholder along the value chain will be assigned responsibility. A business model will be created. Of course, initially it could require support from different stakeholders in terms of how to work out the logistics and how to provide the support to create that business model. But that business model will also try to integrate the whole informal sector, which is currently actually managing end of life, but not in a resource efficient and an environmentally sustainable manner. So the idea is to integrate the informal sector with the formal sector, make the informal sector part of the formal sector, create the whole supply chain where when the end of life also even when it's declared as an end of life, how does it go into the formal sector where the formal and the currently informal work together to manage it in a way, and also to enhance the recovery of this whole secondary raw material. Again, material is being recovered, but lots is getting wasted. So we've done these field visits in Mayapuri area in Delhi, where most of the end of life vehicle management happens, and it's pity to see the kind of resources which are getting wasted. So I'll be happy. We have a whole policy brief which we wrote, and we're currently also trying to develop further work on it. So I'll be happy to share.
Shilpa is based in Mumbai, so she can talk to you wherever. I would also like to introduce my other colleague who's here, Thomas Spencer. Thomas is providing the lead on our work on the transition to renewables.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Mathur, we have a little memento for you.
Oh.
May I request Dr. Goenka and Ullas to join us on stage. Dr. Goenka, may I request you for a vote of thanks for Dr. Mathur.
So Dr. Mathur, thank you very much for an excellent holistic what, why and how of sustainability. I think each one of us has probably attended various seminars on sustainability, but this to me was one of the most complete lecture that I could hear on sustainability. Dr. Mathur and I go back many years when he was at BEE, trying to define star rating for cars and fuel efficiency norms, and we used to be sometimes on the different side of the battlefield, but really appreciated the work that he had done for air conditioners, which has really made a difference. Now we can all look back and thank him for it, and the work that he had done even for automobiles is finally coming to bear. And in his current role at TERI, he is now really becoming the person to go to in India for sustainability and various things. We will have a lot of discussion post when we sit down. I've been trying to meet him in Delhi for almost 4 to 6 months, but not been able to align our calendars. So thank you, Anirban, for inviting him here and giving me the opportunity to spend some time with him. I think there are some very important points that you have brought out, which in some sense are obvious, in other sense are not obvious, and it's good to look at these together and see what it means to us individually and what it means to us as a business in Mahindra. And the most important thing that we should all take back is that sustainability is not CSR. Sustainability is business strategy, and we have said this many times in various fora, that it is a business strategy, and everything that we are doing for sustainability has a business payback to us. And sometimes it may be simply brand building, but more often than not, it is not about brand building, it is about hard cash payback that we have. For example, the carbon pricing that we declared, for which we get a lot of kudos for being the first company in India to do it, but everything that we have done up to now for meeting our carbon pricing commitment is giving us a higher IRR than what we have in designing our tractors and vehicles. Okay, there's not a single thing that we have done for becoming a good corporate citizen. Everything is giving a payback. The solar work that we are doing right now is even as sustained, is profitable, even though we are also bidders at 297 is I think the lowest that we have bid. That was an MP, and it's a profitable business at that price. And we are the first company to bid for a battery-backed solar power plant in Andaman Nicobar. We have won a tender just about a few weeks ago to set up the first, I think about 20 megawatt power plant with battery backup. This is obviously not a 244 because battery backup costs money, but much cheaper than alternates that are available in Andaman Nicobar, which is mostly diesel sets. Second thing, I think becoming climate friendly is something that's going to disrupt technologies, and technologies of tomorrow will force us to make the technologies of today obsolete, and therefore for us to think what we invest in, what kind of hard assets we put on the ground today, we have to keep in mind that the world will be very different as early as 5 to 7 years from now. And when we set up a plant, when we set up anything, we need to look at that very hard, and that's the point that he has made in the risk. I also think that the Paris Accord, as you pointed out, Dr. Mathur, has given India an opportunity to shine. Okay? And the direction that our Prime Minister had taken, an aggressive direction that he has taken, has really given a lot of credibility to India. And added to it is the flip back that US is doing, is adding to India's credibility in the world in terms of what we could do in climate. And I think it's up to corporates like us to support that initiative of Government of India in a very strong manner. And we can do a lot on it without in any sense compromising with our business interest. So that's a very important point that I think you have brought out, which I didn't think of, the leadership position that Paris has given to India, and you have played a very strong role in that. That is something that we need to be very thankful for. The risks that you mentioned are very real, and again, as business leaders, we need to look at each one of these things and see what it means to a business, and the opportunities that you have talked about. Fortunately, we are participating in almost all of the things that you have mentioned, the solar power generation, the battery, agriculture, making agriculture sustainable. Ashok is here, we are looking at many things that we can do there, and the whole EV thing, the swapping of batteries, we can spend a whole day talking about that, we will do it. But all in all, I think what I'm concluding is that sustainability is something that is for real. Sustainability is something that's going to touch every part of our life, individually or as in our work. And it's something that is not a risk to us, it's something that's opportunity for us. And it's up to us to leverage that opportunity and mitigate the risk that you pointed out, which are real short-term risks, and leave a better world for tomorrow, which we can do if we are able to bring down CO2 emission to 42 gigawatt. That number I didn't know before, 42 gigawatt. So that's a good number to keep in mind, and a gap of 11 that we have today, and something that we need to work with. So once again, thank you very much for coming here, spending the time, and from the questions that you got, you could see that there is tremendous interest in Mahindra and everyone, whether they're involved directly in sustainability like Uldas is, and he has been our sort of all-bearer for sustainability for a long time, and has been driving it from the time we started thinking about sustainability. Anirban has come into this when 3 years ago? 3 years now? 3 years ago, and is very aggressively moving forward in sustainability. So again, thank you very much.